Okay, right. So what's next in our programming basics, right? So what is that we have to learn, right, if we want to write a better program, right? So let's look into that, right? So we have already seen variables, data types, right? So statements and expressions we have seen, operators also we have seen, and conditional statements also we have seen, right? So and the next thing is loops. Okay, so why do we need loops, right? So first let me tell you, right, so what is the purpose of the loop, and then we'll see what all type of loops that we have and how to write each and every loop. So then you'll get a clarity. Okay, so now say for example, right, so in any of the program, right, so that you are writing, right, if you want any block of code, right, if you want any block of code that needs to be run multiple times, okay, that needs to be run multiple times, right, in those scenarios we will use loops. Okay, so if you want some block of code, right, so that needs to be run multiple times, so then we use loops. Okay, so let me give you one small example so that so you will get a clear picture. Okay, so but before that, right, so what will happen, right, these all lines of code will execute only once, right? So generally, right, so line after the line, 1 2 3 4 5 6 and all of that, right? So this block of lines, okay, if you want them to execute, right, so multiple times, right, like maybe 5 times or 500 times or maybe 5,000 times, depends upon your requirement. If you want that code to run those many times, right, in those cases, right, so we'll use loops. So right, so and once that loop is completed, so then again it will go to the next line of the code and it will execute each and every line one after the other, right? So in these cases, right, so we'll use loops, as I said, right? So if we don't have loops, what will happen? Okay, if we don't have loops, what will happen and why loops were introduced, right? So let's quickly check that. Okay, say for example, I want to print 1 to 10 numbers. Okay, generally what we'll do, right? So system dot debug, right? System dot debug what? 1, right? And then system dot debug 2, right? System dot debug 3, right? System dot debug 4 and all of that, right? So this way what will happen, right? So you have to write the same piece of code, right, 10 times, right, in order to print the one, I mean, like in order to print those 10 numbers, right? So what will happen, right? So what if this number goes up to 100? What if this number goes up to so 1,000 or something like that? So do we need to write the same piece of code 1,000 times and 100 times? Then it will become difficult, right, for us even to maintain that code, or even if something goes wrong in between, right, so where exactly it went wrong and all of that will become hell lot of difficult for us to maintain that code and even to write that as well. Okay, so for that reason, right, so in most of the, in all the programming languages, not most of the programming languages, right, in all the programming languages, so we have a concept called loops, right? So if you are using loops, what will happen is that the same thing, right, whatever that you want to execute it for multiple times, we can just simply write that once. Okay, we can just simply write that once, but what can we do is, right, so we can I mean, so we have to just simply give the loops related syntax, and we can just simply write that block of code only once, right? So based on whatever conditions and everything that we are setting for that particular so loop related syntax, so it will execute that piece of code those many number of times, so that the number of lines of code that you are writing within your program, right, so will be reduced. Okay, and at the same time it will be easy for us to maintain, and it will be easy for us to so write as well. Okay, so now let's quickly check what all types of loops that we have. Okay, so majorly we have, right, so 3 types of loops, right? So we call them as while, do while, and for. Okay, so these are the major loops that we find in any of the programming language, right? So apart from that, right, so in some programming languages, right, so we'll have for each, and in some, I mean, like, so in our Apex, right, so along with for each we have something called SOQL for loop as well. Okay, so these two are the extra loops that we need to learn, right? So in Apex, but the whole, I mean, like all the above, so loops that what we have here are similar across all the programming languages, right? Similar across all the programming languages. Okay, so now let's quickly look at so each and every loop. Okay, so but before learning loop, right, so there is so there is something that we need to understand. Okay, right, just quickly look into that, right? So what is that we need to understand? Okay, so for every loop there will be three components that we should take care of. Okay, so there, for every loop, what I said, three components that we need to take care of. Okay, so three things that we need to take care of. So let's quickly see what are those three things. Okay, so one is variable declaration and initialization. Okay, variable declaration and initialization, right? So we also call this as looping variable. Okay, so looping variable declaration and initialization, this is one thing. Okay, and the second thing is condition, right? And the third thing is increment or decrement. Okay, increment or decrement the value, right, of a looping variable, right? So increment or decrement of the increment and decrement, right, of the looping variable. Okay, looping variable, increment or decrement of so increment or decrement of the value of a looping variable. Okay, so these three are the major things that we need to consider. Okay, what is the first one? Looping variable declaration and initialization, right? So and the loop condition, and the third one is increment or decrement of the value of looping variable, right? So in simple terms, right, people generally call it as, right, so declaration and initialization, right? So this is how just they'll simply call it, right? So declaration and initialization. Okay, and then, right, so condition, right? So and then the last one is increment or decrement, right? So this is how they'll generally people so call it. But right, so if you want to understand it in more so granular level, right, so this is what so the full form of each and everything, right? So looping variable declaration and initialization, right? So we also call it as declaration and initialization. So and the second thing is, right, so loop condition, right? So second thing is loop condition, right? So we also call it as right, so condition in simple terms. And the third thing is increment and decrement of the value of a looping variable, right? So we also call it as, right, in simple terms, increment or decrement, right? So declaration and initialization, condition, and increment or decrement, right? So these three things that we need to, right, so keep in mind while writing any of the loops, right? So whether it is a while loop or do while loop or for loop, right? So these three things are necessary. Okay, so now let's so quickly look into the so example that we have seen. Okay, so but before that, right, so now let's see how the syntax of while loop looks like, right? So and then let's try to write the same code, right? Print 1 to 10 numbers, right? So using that while loop, so that you'll get a clarity. Okay, so let me go to our developer console, right? So now I'm in our Salesforce org. Let me just simply click on our developer console. Okay, and first let me print those 1 to 10 numbers without using any of the loop, right? And after that we'll write the loop, and then we'll see the difference. Okay, so let me go to debug and open execute anonymous window, right? So let me comment all the code, right? So whatever code that I have, right, so all the unnecessary code, let's just simply, right, so comment all of this. Okay, right. So okay, if I want to print first 10 numbers, right, so print 1 to 10 numbers, right? So this is our requirement. Okay, so if you are writing it normally, right, so then it should be like system dot debug of 1. Okay, so and then, right, so system dot debug of 2. Okay, okay, right. So and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So like that we'll have, okay? So let me just simply copy this, right? So multiple times, right? See how many lines of code that we got, right? So almost like 10 lines of code we got, right? So 2, right? So 3 and 4, 5, right? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so let me just simply keep it like this. Okay, right. So why I have given so each and every number between quotes is because I just want so our system.debug to consider this as a string, right? And just simply print it. Okay, so for that reason I have just simply gave it like that. Okay, so let me just simply execute this and see what will happen, right? So we'll just simply get all of those numbers printed one after the other, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so now so right, we'll do the same thing, right? So by reducing the number of lines of code using what, like loops. Okay, so first look at the while loop. Okay, so first look at the while loop, right? So how a while loop will look like. Okay, so this is the syntax of while loop, right? So while, right, so you will write the condition, right? So but before that, right, so you'll do the, right, what I've told you, three components, right? So first thing is increment or decrement. Okay, so increment or not the increment or decrement, sorry. So the initialization of looping variable, right? So initialization of looping variable, right? So first we'll declare the variable here, right? So variable, right? So variable declaration and initialization, right? So that is what we have to consider first, right? So initialization, right? So and after that, right, so we have to use while keyword, right? So and with so within that while, right, we have to give our condition, right? And after that, whatever block of code or piece of code that we want to execute, right, so multiple times, we'll just simply write all of that code. And within this block, right, so within this block, right, at the end or maybe at the beginning, right, or at the beginning, right, or at the end, what we'll do, right, so we will do that increment or decrement. So right, the one that I've just told you, right? So increment or decrement of the looping variable, right? So we will do it, right? So along with the piece of code, either at the beginning of the block or the at the end of the block, right? So these three are the things that you need to keep in mind, right? So first we'll declare the looping variable, right? So looping variable declaration or initialization, and after that we'll write the condition, right? So we'll use the while keyword and we'll just simply write our condition. And right, so we will so write all the block of code that we want to execute multiple times, and at the beginning of this block of code or at the ending of the block of code, right, so we will have this increment or decrement, right? So this is that simple, right? So this is the overall right, so syntax of a while loop, right? So now let's right, so quickly check that same example, right? So what do we want to do? We want to print 1 to 10 numbers, right? So now we clearly, so understand that, right? So we want to execute that block of code 10 times, right? So which block of code? System.debug, right? System.debug, right? So this number or whatever it could be, right? So this same block of code, right? So we want to execute 10 times. So now we have a clarity on that, right? So now for that, what we have to do, right? So first we need to declare the looping variable, right? So how many times we want our loop to run? We want our loop to run 10 times, right? We want our loop to run 10 times. That means this block of code, we want to execute it for 10 times, right? So for that, what can we do is, right? So first, let's declare a looping variable. Looping variable, what does it do? Right, so we will generally use that within the condition to check, right? So how many times, right? So this loop needs to run and all of that, right? So in order to identify that, right? So we will use right, so right, a looping variable, and then right, so we will increment that looping variable right at the beginning or the end, right? And then right, we'll make sure that, right, so this condition is satisfied, right, in order to execute this piece of code. Okay, so if you are not understanding this, don't worry much about it, right? So once we start writing so this variable declaration and all of that, you'll get a clarity. Okay, first what we can do, right? So let's declare a variable, right? So the looping variable. So we want this to run 10 times, right? So now let's declare a variable named integer a or b or I or whatever it could be. You can declare anything, right? So with any name, right? So I'm declaring a variable with the name integer I. Okay, so this is the looping variable, right? So what I'm doing, I'm giving a value as 0 or maybe a value as 1, whichever value that we want to give, we can just simply give that. Okay, most of the times it will be 0 or 1. Okay, so what I generally told you, right, so as a best practice, right, if you are declaring a variable, always try to initialize it with some value. If you don't know the value, just simply give it 0. If you know the value, right, so then give that particular value. So this is something we have already discussed, right? So now we have given the looping variable. Okay, so now what can we do, right? So we'll just simply write the while condition, while, right? So, and we have to write the condition. Condition means what? Generally, it's an expression, right? So which should evaluate to either true or false. Okay, so as long as this condition is satisfied, whatever condition that we are writing here, as long as this condition is satisfied, what so while loop will do is, right, so it will execute whatever piece of code that we are writing within that block. Okay, so in order to execute this block, that condition needs to be satisfied. As long as that condition is satisfied, so it will execute that block of code any number of times. Okay, so but in our case, what do we want to do, right? So we want to run this piece of code only for 10 times. Okay, we want to run that piece of code only for 10 times. So for that reason, what can we do is, 1 second, guys. Okay, for that reason, what we have to do is, right, so let's write that condition here. What is that condition, right? So as long as this I is less than 10, right? So write, I mean, like, execute this block of code. That is what our condition should be. Okay, based on this looping variable, we have to write that condition as well. Okay, so I less than or equals to 10. Okay, so I less than or equals to 10. What do we want to do? So we want to execute whatever block of code that we are writing here. Okay, so what do we have in I now, right? So we have 0 in I. So is 0 less than 10 or not? It's less than 10, right? So now what we want to do, we want to execute this piece of code. What is that we want to execute? We want to execute system.debug, right? So what do we want to do, right? So we want to print this I itself. Okay, let's print that I itself, right? So what will happen, right? So if you are printing I, it will give us the 0 first. Okay, so and after that, what will happen, right? So what I've told you, right? So as long as this condition is satisfied, what it will do, it will execute whatever piece of code that we have given here, right? So now 0 is less than 10, so that, right, for that reason, it will print this. Now again 0 will become less. So what's happening here? There is nothing much happening here, right? We are just printing, right? So that 0, right? So every time, if I'm like, so this loop checks whether this right, so I is less than or equals to 10 or not. Every time you'll get that true. Why? Because you have the value as 0 in I. Okay, so now what do we want, right? So we don't want the value in I to be 0 all the time, right? If that is 0 all the time, then what will happen, right? So this particular block of code will run infinite times. Why? Because this condition will always satisfy that, right? So why? Because 0 is always less than 10, right? For that reason, what we'll do is, right, so we have to do this increment or decrement to that looping variable, right? So what kind of increment or decrement we have to do, right? So now just simply click that, I'm like, check this, right? So now what we can do is, we can make I is equals to I plus 1, or maybe I plus plus, whatever you want to write, whichever way you want to write it, you can write it, right? So but this is what we have to do, right? So we have to increment or decrement this. What we are doing here, we are incrementing this I. Okay, so now what we have done, right? So first we have 0 in I, right? So and we have printed that 0, and after that, what we have made it, right? So we have made that I as, right? So I is equals to I plus 1. Then what will happen, right? So in this case, right? So now in I, we will have 1 as the value. Okay, so now what loop will do is, right? So it will come back to this condition, and again it will check for that condition. Is 1 less than or equals to 10? Yes. So then what it will do, it will simply execute this piece of code. Okay, so let me just simply remove all of this, right, and come back. Okay, here, right? So and let me just simply write it. Okay, so first, right, this is what the whole so loop loop is all about, right? So the while loop is all about, right? So we have done this initialization and declaration, right? After that we have written the condition, right? After that we have written whatever block of code that we want to execute multiple times, and we have given the increment and decrement as well, right? So now just simply check, like, how this particular right, so piece of code is going to execute, right? So first what will happen, right? So it will check, so we have 0 in I, right? So 0 less than right, so equals to 10, right? So this condition is coming out as true, right? So now then what will happen, right? So it will go inside, right, inside of this block of code, and it will execute whatever we have written here. What we have written here, right? We have written system.debug I. That means first it will print 0. Okay, and then what we are doing here, right, after this line we are making I equals to I plus 1, right? So now what will happen, right? So in I we'll have 1 as the value. Why? Because why we'll have 1 as the value in I? Why? Because we are doing, right, I is equal to I plus 1, right? So now 0 plus 1 will become 1. Okay, so is now it will again come back here, and it will check for the condition. Okay, is 1 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 1 is less than or equals to 10, right? So now what will happen, right? So now again it will come back here, and it will execute this piece of code. What we are doing here, we are printing I, right? So now we have right, so 1 in I, right? So now what will happen, right? So that 1 will get printed here. So now what we are doing here, again we are making I equals to I plus 1, right? So now what will happen, right? So in I we'll have what, 1 plus 1, right? So which will be 2, right? So now what will happen, right? So it will come here, and it will again check, right? Is 2 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 2 is less than or equals to 10, right? So now it will come back here, and what it will do, it will execute this, it will print 2. Now what's happening here, right? So again, right, so the 2 is getting incremented, right? So now what will happen, right? So in I you'll get 2 plus 1, right? So currently what value that we have in I? 2 is the value that we have in I, right? So now what we are doing, we are adding 1 to that value, right? So which is 2 plus 1, right? So now it will become as 3. Is 3 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 3 less than or equals to 10. Then print 3, right? So this way, right? So it will, right, so go up to, right, so the last number, which is 9. Okay, so in case of 9, what will happen, right? So it will print the 9 as well, right? So when you have value of I as 9, right, so it will print that so 9, and what will happen, right? So in this, at this line of code, right, so 9 will become 10. Why? Because 9 plus 1 equals to 10, right? So is right, 10 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 10 is less than or equals to 10, right? So why? Because here we are checking, right, so this number should be either less than 10 or equals to 10. That's what less than or equals to means, right? So now, right, so here this condition is also satisfying. Now what will happen, it will come here, right? So it will print 10 also, right? And after that what will happen, right? So 10 will become 11, right? So why? Because we are making 10 plus 1, right? So it will become 11, right? So now again it will come back here, and it will check, is 11 less than or equals to 10? No, false, right? So 11 is not less than or equals to 10. So 11 is greater than 10, right? So for that reason, right, so this condition has failed, and since that condition has failed, what it will do is it will come out of this particular loop, and after that whatever lines of code that we have written, so it will start executing this. Okay, if there is any code after this, it will execute it, otherwise it will just simply leave it like that. Okay, so that's how a loop works. Is it clear, guys? Is it clear? Or do you have any questions here? Okay, so now clear, so closely observe this, right? So what we have done, right? So we have declared a variable first. Okay, so that's what, so is that is what the first component of a loop, right? So variable declaration or initialization. Which variable? Looping variable. Why we call that as a looping variable? Why? Because based on that variable only we are writing our condition. Okay, so based on this variable only, right? So this I, right, integer I, based on this variable only we have written our condition. Okay, so for that reason, right, so we call this as a looping variable. Okay, so first we have declared our looping variable, and we have initialized our looping variable with a value 0, and after that we are checking our condition. Okay, so as long as that condition is satisfying, what we are doing, right, so we are executing this piece of code. Within this piece of code, what we have done, we have just simply made it, we are doing that increment or decrement, right? So which is I equals to I plus 1. What we are incrementing or decrementing? We are incrementing or decrementing the looping variable itself. Okay, so that's what, so we generally have in any of the loops, not just while loop. In all the loops, this is what we'll have. Okay, but while, right, so this is the syntax of the while. Okay, so first you'll do the initialization and the declaration part, right? So initialization and declaration and initialization, it should be the other way. Okay, part. And after that, condition part. Okay, so and after that, your block of code, right? So within this block, right, so we are having increment or decrement of the value, right? Value of looping variable. That is what we have done, right? So looping variable. Okay, so what we have incremented, we have incremented I, right? So we incremented the value that is there in the I, right? So it started with 0 and it has become 1, 2, 3 and all of that. And what we are doing, we are just simply printing that I only. Okay, so right, so here we are printing that I, but in general, right, so it can be any block of code. Okay, it can be any block of code. That block of code will be executed as long as this condition is satisfied. Okay, if this condition failed, it will just come out of that loop. And if you have any other lines of code after that particular block, it will execute that. Otherwise, it will just simply stop. Okay, so that's what it is. Let's just simply write that so piece of code, and let's try executing this and see what will happen. Right, so in our case, right, so we are printing 0 as well, right? So I asked to print 1 to 10 numbers, but in this logic, right, so we are printing 0 also. But if you want to print it from 1, then in that case, what we have to do, right, so we have to initialize our variable with the value 1 instead of 0. Okay, that's it. Okay, now just simply try to write, so try to write, so write that particular loop and see what will happen. Okay, right. Okay, right. So integer a or I, whatever you want to call it, right? Most of the times we use this I. Why? Because, right, so that's how, so people have started writing so code. Okay, so but you can use any so name of the variable. Okay, you don't need to use only I. Some people use n, some people use I, some people use a, right, like that, right? So but mostly, right, so people use I. Okay, so integer I equals to, right, so what we have written, right, so we have started with 0. Okay, so let's keep that 0 only for time being. And so we'll see the output, and then, right, if needed, right, we'll change the right, so values that we are initializing at the time of declaration of the variable, right? So we'll do that as well, right? So now what's next, right? So variable is initialized. Okay, so looping variable initialization, right? So happen, right? If there are any spelling mistakes, please excuse me. Okay, so looping variable initialization, right? Declaration and initialization happen, and after that, while you have to use while keyword, and between that so floor not I mean, like, so between the braces you have to give the condition. What is our condition? I less than or equals to 10. Okay, so as long as I less than or equals to 10, so please execute, right? So this piece of code, whatever I am writing here, so what we want to write, system dot debug, right? Debug, what will happen, right? So debug, right, so directly we can print this I itself, right? So we don't need to so use any single quotes and all of that. Why? Because, right, so we want to print whatever value that is there in this I. Okay, so it starts with 0. First this 0 will be printed. Okay, and after that, what I've asked you to, right, so increment this looping variable. Okay, so what is this? Right, so increment is all about, right? So either you can just simply keep it like I is equal to I plus 1, or maybe you can just simply keep it like I plus plus. Both of them are same, right? Most of the times we use it like this, I plus plus. Okay, so let's keep it like this. That's it. Okay, now let's execute this and see what will happen. But before that, here what we have, right? So here we have condition, right? So this particular thing is the block of code, right? So block of code, right? So and this particular thing, whatever we have written here, if this is the increment or decrement. Okay, all right. So now let's execute this and see what will happen. All right. Since I have written 2 black slashes, what does that mean, right? So this is a comment, right? So this won't get executed, right? So only this particular, right, whatever thing that we have written here, this won't be executed. But apart from that, whatever code that we have, right? So all of that will be executed, right? So now let's execute this and see what will happen. Go to debug only. See, it started with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. So that's how it has printed all the numbers, right? So that loop has ran for how many times? 11 times. It started with 0 and it ran up to, right. So 10th number. That means it ran for 11 times. But what do we need, right? So we need only 1 to 10 numbers. So in that case, what can we do, right? Instead of, right. So initializing this variable with 0, we can just simply initialize this with 1, and then, right, so it will start printing it from 1 instead of 0. Why? Because 1 is less than or equals to 10. Yes, this condition is satisfying. It will come here, it will print the 1, and then so we'll have a value of, right, so this I will become 2. Why? Because I equals to I plus 1, right? Since we have 1 in that I, right, so now that 1 will become 2, right? Why? Because, right, so we are incrementing this particular variable. Okay, so right, so now let's execute this one and see what will happen, right? So that 0 will disappear and we will find only, right, so 1 to 10 numbers in this case. Let's go back to debug only, right? So now we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so now let's go to the next loop. Okay, so we'll see multiple examples. Okay, don't need to worry much about it, right? So we'll see multiple examples, but first learn what all things that we have, right? So in terms of loops, right? So we are done with while loop, right? So and next, right, so Salesforce has given us one more loop, which is do while loop. Okay, so but before, right, so checking for that, I mean checking the do while loop, just simply check the syntax once again, right? So that it will register in your mind strongly. Okay, so this is what the syntax, right? So as I told you, variable declaration or initialization, and after that while keyword you have to use, and after that you have to give the condition within the braces. Okay, so this condition should be dependent on whatever variable that you are declaring here, right? So looping variable, right? That's why we call it as a looping variable. Why? Because, right, so based on that variable only we are checking the condition. That's why we call it as a looping variable. And after that, whatever statements that we want to execute, block of code or whatever it could be, right, we can just simply write all of that. And at last, right, so we can either increment it or decrement it. Okay, so that's what while loop is all about. And this looping is something that we also call it as iterating all as well. Okay, so some people call it as iteration, some people call it as a loop, some people call it as a looping, right? So that activity, that what we are doing, right, some people call it as looping, some people call it as iterating, right? So iteration, loop, right, iterating, looping, right? So both of those words are interchangeable. Okay, so please keep that in mind. Okay, iteration or iteration, whatever you call it. Okay, so that's what this particular thing is all about. Now let's quickly look at do while, right? So do while also follows the same sort of so logical, I mean the same sort of structure, but there is a slight change that we have, right? So that we need to quickly understand, right? So before we write any kind of do while. Okay, so now just simply quickly check the syntax, but before that, right, so now let me write the syntax, right, so in large what font, so that you'll get to understand that. Okay, so right, so now what is this do while, right? So do while is also similar to what, right? So this particular thing. Okay, so what is it, right? So while loop, but the only difference is, let's quickly check this, right? So this is the syntax of do while. Okay, so first what you'll have is, right, so you'll have the initialization and declaration. Okay, so like how we have it for while loop, right? First you'll have the initialization, okay, of the looping variable, initialization, right? So if there are any spelling mistakes, please excuse me. Okay, initialization of the looping variable, right? So these three components are very important, I've told you, right? So in any of the loop, right? So here also we'll first initialize the looping variable, and after that what we will do is, right, so there is something called do block. Okay, so we'll write something like this, right? So we'll not write the condition and all of it, right? So we'll use do keyword, and after the do keyword, right, so we'll just simply write whatever block of code that we want to right, execute multiple times, right? That block of code we will write within this block, do block, right? So here what we will do is we will do that increment and decrement also here, Okay. So increment and decrement of this looping variable, whatever looping variable that we have initialized, right? So that increment and decrement, incrementing and the decrementing of that looping variable we'll do here within the block itself, either at the beginning or at the ending of the block of code, depends upon our requirement. Okay. So, and after that, so at the end of this particular, so at the, I'm like, while closing this particular, so block, right, with the curly brace, what we'll do is we'll write while keyword and the condition. Okay, that's why we call it as do while. Okay, so what is the difference between while and do while in that case then? Okay, so the difference between while and do while is that, right, so whenever we are using right, so while, what it will do is, right, so only if and only if this condition is satisfied, right, if and only if this condition is satisfied, then only it will execute whatever we are, right, whatever we have written in the block of that while. But here in do, what will happen is that irrespective of this condition, right, so it will execute this block at least once. Okay, what it will do, it will execute this block at least once. Why it will execute that block at least once is because just simply look at the order of execution, flow of execution. It starts from the beginning, right? So first it will execute this line of code, and after that it will come here, right? So there is no condition, nothing here. So for that reason, it will just come to this do block, and whatever we have written here, right, and it will execute that, right? And after that, it will increment it also, right? Whatever we have given, right? So whatever looping variable that we have declared, right? So it will increment that also. Now it will come and check for the condition, right? So if that condition is satisfied, then it will go back and execute this once again, but it is already executed for the first time. Okay, so why? Because there is no condition that we have checked here so far. Okay, for that reason, right, so it executed, right, so executed, right, so executed first, right? So this has executed this block of code, and after that it came to this while condition and it started checking it, right? If this condition is satisfied, then again it will come back and it will start, executing it for second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, right? So as long as this condition is satisfied, it will execute it for any number of times. Okay, once this condition is failed, right, so then it will come out of this whole block of code, right? So, and then it will execute if there is any other lines of code that we have after this block. Otherwise, it will just simply, finish the program. Okay, so that's how this do while works. But the major difference is this do while will at least execute once whatever block that we want to execute multiple times, that this do while loop, it will execute at least once before checking the condition. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, so even whether that condition is satisfied or not, it will first execute, right, so this block of code for the first time, and after that it will check for the condition, right? So as long as this condition is satisfied, it will execute multiple times. If this condition is not satisfied, it will just simply come out of it, but this code will execute at least once. Okay, so that's what this do while loop is all about, right? So now let's go and so write a small program or whatever it could be to understand this do while loop, right? Or let's just simply check the same piece of code. Okay, what can we do, right? So the same thing that I've told you, right? So we have right, so now let's just come down and let's write the same code once again, right? So first, what I've told you, right? So integer I equals to 1, right? So integer I equals to 1, right? So, and after that, right, so what I've told you, right, so the variable looping variable declaration and initialization, here also we have to do that, right? So that is also happened. And after that, what we have to do, we have to use a do keyword, right? So, and after that, right, whatever you want to execute, you'll just simply bring that up here into this block, right? So it will be the same block of code, right? So there will be nothing much different. Okay, but after that, right, so what you'll do, you'll use something called while keyword, right? So within this while, you will give your condition. What is our condition, right? So if you want to print the same, if you want to execute the same thing, like printing this 1 to 10 numbers, right? So we can use do while as well, right? So but here we'll write the condition. So now what will happen, right? So first it will right, so initialize this value, right? So now we have 1 in this I. Now it will come to this block of code. What it will do, it will just simply execute this, right? So what it will do, it will print that 1. Okay, and after that, so 1 will become 2, right? So is 2 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 2 is less than or equals to 10. This, since this condition is satisfied, it will come back and again it will start executing this, right? So now 2 will be printed. Now 2 will become 3, right? Is 3 less than or equals to 10? Yes, 3 is less than or equals to 10. that condition satisfied. Now it will again come back, it will execute this. So now that since that 3 became 4, right, that 4 will be printed. Now 4, right, so will become 5, right? So is 5 less than or 10, right? Yes, 5 will be printed, right? So that way, so it will print all the numbers, but there is nothing much difference, right? So both of them are doing the same work, but the major difference is, even though if this condition is not satisfied, right, so it will print whatever that we have, I mean, it'll execute whatever that we have given here at least once. So we'll see the difference also. Okay, but before that, right, just simply try to execute the same right, so piece of code with the help of do while as well, right? So and then we'll see the difference. Okay, so but before that, so let me just simply comment this. Okay, so I've commented it, right? So now let me execute this. Okay, yes, so what it is saying, we are expecting a semicolon at the end, so that semicolon is missing. So please make sure that you are using semicolon also, guys, at the end of this while. Okay, otherwise it will throw that error. Okay, so let's execute this and see what will happen. Here also we got the same output, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. But let's go back, right? So and let's see what will happen, right? So if I am just simply giving I less than or equals to 1, or maybe, so what can we do, right? So I yeah, so I less than or equals to 0, say for example, this is what I'm saying. Okay, so I less than or equals to 0, then only right, so increment this and all of that. That is what I'm saying, say for example. Okay, so now what will happen, right? So generally, if I am using the same condition here, right? So what will happen? Can someone tell me if I'm using the same condition here, right? So what will happen? It will not execute anything here. Okay. So now just simply, right? So first let me, so comment this do while first, right? So, and execute the while loop with the same condition, which is I less than or equals to 0, right? So this doesn't make any sense, but, so I just want to may I mean, like, so let you understand, right? How this whole thing works. For that reason, right? So I have made I equals to less than, or I less than or equals to 0. This now what do we have in I, right? So we have 1 in I, right? So is 1 less than or equals to 0? It's false, right? So since that is false, what will happen, right? So this block of code will never execute. Okay, so it will just simply come out of this so whole loop, and it will so go and see if there are any other lines of code after this. It will start executing this, otherwise it will just simply stop. But in our case, right, since no lines of code is there, right, so since we have commented this, that means, so it will not consider this as any piece of code, right? So it will just simply finish that, and you will not see any output. Why? Because 1 is not less than or equals to 0, right? So this condition is failing, right? So let's execute this and see what will happen. See, nothing is coming up. Okay, so but let's check the same thing with do while. Okay, so let's check the same thing with do while. Okay, check that with the do while. So what we have done, so we have the same logic, right? So I equals to 1, so here also I equals to 1, right? And after that we have written do, right? So within this do, right, so it's the same code, right? So in while also we have the same condition. Okay, so but see what will happen, right? So you'll get the 1 printed first. Okay, so see, you'll see the difference. Can you guys see that? 1 got printed. Why 1 got printed? As I told you earlier. So irrespective of this condition, right, what it will do? It will execute this block of code at least once. That's what it has done, right? So first, right, so we have 1 in I, right? So and then it came here, right? So and then it just simply executed whatever we have given here, right? It has printed that one, and then it has incremented it also. Now we have 2 in 1, right? So 2 in I. Okay, so why? Because that I has become 2. Why? Because, since we are incrementing it, now it is checking for the condition. Is 2 less than or equals to 0? No, right? So this condition is failing. So now let me, so come out of this particular loop and don't do anything, right? So that's how it has decided, and just simply it came out of it. But what happened, right? So this block of code has been executed already, right? So that's what I've told you. It will execute at least once. Okay. So now just simply type system dot debug, right? So loop ended or something like that. Okay. So now what happened, right? So as I told you, right, once you come out of this loop, whatever you write after that, so that will also get executed, right? So now let's execute this once again and see what will happen. That one will be printed, and after that, so once we come out of that loop, right? So whatever we wrote, right, that will also get executed. That will also get executed, right? So that also happened, right? Loop ended, right? So that also we have seen here. So now let's go to the next loop, which is for loop. Okay. So again, let's so go through this syntax once again. Okay. So variable declaration or initialization, right? So which is looping variable declaration of or initialization. Okay. And after that, do, right, statements to execute, right? So within this block of code, right? So within this block of code, right? So you will have that increment or decrement as well. And then while and the condition at last, semicolon also we have to give. Okay. So this is the do while, right? And next, what's the third loop, right? So which is for loop. Okay. So let's see how this for loop works, right? So this will also do the same thing, whatever that while loop is doing, right? So this will also do the same thing, but the syntax will be little, so simple, I mean, like, compared to, right? So what do we have, right? So for this, right, while loop and do while loop. Okay. So that's what the difference, but apart from that, everything is same. Okay. So now let's quickly check the syntax of for loop. Okay. So for, you'll have something called for, right? So, and within this for, right? So first we will do the variable declaration or initialization. Okay. Variable declaration or initialization. Okay. So, and then, right? So condition, you'll write your condition here. Okay. Condition. Okay. So condition. Okay. And then increment or decrement. Okay. And then increment or decrement. Increment or decrement of what? That looping variable. Okay. Increment or decrement. Okay. So this is what it is, right? So that's it. Okay. So you'll have for, right? So here, right? So you'll have your variable declaration, your condition, and the increment or decrement of that particular looping variable. Okay. All of these three elements or three components are divided by semicolon. Okay. Divided by semicolon. And what you'll do, right? You'll just simply, I mean, like, so you'll use these braces, right? So curly braces to write whatever block of code that you want to execute multiple times. So now what will happen, right? So variable will be declared, and after that it will check for that condition, right? So as long as that condition is true, what it will do, it will come down and it will execute this piece of code, right? So once this piece of code is executed, then what will happen, it will go back and it will so increment or decrement that particular looping variable. So and then what will happen, right? Again, right? So once that increment or decrement is happened, right? So it will come to this particular condition and it will again check for this condition. If that condition is true, I mean satisfied, it will come back, it will execute this block of code, right? And after that again, right? So it will go back, right? After that, what will happen, right? So again, it will go back, right? So, and then, right? So it will increment that looping variable, right? So, and then again, it will come here and it will check for the condition. If that condition is satisfied, right? So it will come back and execute this piece of code once again, right? So, and then what will happen, right? So again, it will go back and increment or decrement that looping variable, right? So again, it will come and check for that condition. If that condition is satisfied, then again, it will come back and execute this piece of code, right? So now what will happen, right? So again, it will go back and, right? So increment or decrement that particular looping variable, right? So again, it will check for the condition, right? So if that condition failed, then what will happen is that, so it will exit that particular loop and come out of that loop, and whatever code that you write after that, right? So it will execute it. Otherwise, right? So what will happen? It will just simply, right? So it will just simply, so if there are no lines of code, right? So it will just simply end the whole execution. Otherwise, right? So it will come out of it. Okay. And all of it. Now let's quickly check the syntax. Okay. Right. What is the syntax that we have? Right. So this is not the right syntax. Right. So let me just simply remove all of it. Right. So what is the syntax? Right. So for, okay. So and then what? For increment or not increment or decrement. Right. So variable declaration or initialization. Okay. So, and after that, what I've told you, right? So semicolon, and after that condition. Okay. Right. So again, semicolon, and after that, what? Right. So increment or decrement. Okay. Increment or decrement. Okay. So, and then whatever block of code, right? So whatever statement that you want to execute, that statement to execute. Okay, that's it. Statements to execute. That's it, right? So this is what the for loop is all about. For you'll write, right? So, and within the braces, right? So all of this variable declaration, condition, increment or decrement, right? So it seems like there are few spelling mistakes, but please, so excuse me, don't consider that, pardon me for that. Okay, so right, so increment and decrement and the statements to execute, that's it, right? So most of the times, right, since this is somewhat easy compared to writing this while, do while and all of that, so most of the times what will happen is that people consider using for loop rather than using while and do while. Okay, so if you want any piece of code, the block of code that you want to have in your loop to run at least once, right? So irrespective of the condition, we'll use do while. Otherwise, right, either we use while or we'll use for loop. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So now let's go back to the same example and try to so execute so this and see what will happen, right? So try to implement the same thing, right? So printing of 1 to 10 numbers, that's using for loop, and see what will be the output. Okay, so now just simply come here, right? So for what I've told you, for here you can do this, right? So integer a equals to, right? So 1, not a, right? So I, right? So we have taken I equals to what? 1. Okay, so now what happened, right? So the variable initialization and declaration happened. Okay, and after that what? After that what? Right? So condition, right? So what is the condition? I less than or equals to 10. As long as I less than or equals to 10, so please run right, whatever block of code that we are writing here. Okay, so please run that code. As long as this condition is satisfied, please run that code any number of times, right? So for any number of iterations, please do that. That is what this condition is all about, right? So we have written condition as well, right? And after that what? Okay, and after that what? I plus plus, right? So this increment or decrement also we can do, right? So that I plus plus also I have written, right? So now what can we, I plus plus you can write, or maybe I equals to I plus 1, whichever way you want to write, you can write it. Okay, and after that what? Just simply system dot debug, right? So what is it? I, that's it. Okay, so now let's see what will happen. And after the end, what we can do, we can just simply write system dot debug loop ended. Okay, so before that also I'll write some code. Okay, so you can have any piece of code before that loop and after that loop, as I told you earlier. Okay, system dot debug. Okay, something I'm writing here. Okay, so printing 1 to 10 numbers. Okay, so printing 1 to 10 numbers, right? So that is what we have given here, right? So we have to use semicolon also here. Okay, all right, so now let's print it out. Now let's execute this and see what left, right? So now also you'll see the same kind of output, but so above that block of code and below that block of code, we have written few other lines of few other so lines as well, right? So that is what it is, printing 1 to 10 numbers, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10, and after that loop ended. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So as long as this condition satisfied, it has executed that. Okay, so first what happened, we have so value in I is 1, right? So this 1 is less than or equal to 10, yes, right? So that's satisfied. So now what will happen, it will just simply come here and it will execute this, right? So now this got printed. Now what will happen, right? So it will come here and it will increment it. Okay, so this increment and decrement is not there within our right, so what is it, right? So within our right, so block of code, but that was there directly within the for loop initialization itself, right? So within the for loop itself we have it, right? So now that I became 2, right? So now what will happen, right? So is 2 less than or equals to 10, yes, right? So then what will happen, right? So the 2 will be printed, right? So then this 2 will become 3, right? So why? Because so we are incrementing it, right? So now is 3 less than or equals to 10, yes, right? So now that 3 also will be printed, right? So now what will happen, right? So we are incrementing that 3 to 4. Okay, now the 3 has become 4. Is 4 less than or equals to 10, yes, right? So now what will happen, right? So it will print that 4 here. Okay, so right, since we have 4 in I, right? So it will print that 4. Now what will happen, right? So again it will come, right? So this 4 will become 5, right? So now is 5 less than or equals to 10? Yes, right? So then it will print 5, right? So that way, right? So it will execute that loop any number of times. Okay. So now, so this is what, so the loops are all about, right? So these are the loops that we majorly use in most of the programming languages. Okay. So these are the 3 loops that we mostly use in most of the programming languages. Okay. So that is something you guys have to keep in mind, right? So apart from this, right, so we have something called for each and SOQL for loop, right? So these loops, right, so we will discuss, right? So when we so see, right, so when we what when we learn collections, right, and SOQL as well. SOQL, there is something called Salesforce Object Query Language, right? So when we learn, right, this collections and so Salesforce Object Query Language, then we will see what is this for each loop and what is that SOQL for loop. Okay, but for now you can just simply keep that in mind, right? So along with these 3 loops, right, so we do have some other right, types of loops as well in Apex, which is for each loop and SOQL for loop, right? So this is something you guys have to keep in mind. Okay, so and then we have break and continue statements in loops as well, right? So we'll see what this break and continue statement, but before that, let's look at few examples, right? So let's check few of the hands-on exercises that we have and try to implement that. Then you'll get some kind of comfortableness, right, in using loops. Then, right, so we'll see what this break and continue statement. Okay, so now let's go back to our hands-on exercises that we have for this particular topic that was given in our right, so LMS. Okay, right. Okay, right.
Later.
So now let's quickly check this, right? So now we have one right, so requirement to print even numbers between 0 to 99. Okay, what do we want to do? Right, we want to print even numbers between 0 to 99. It will become easy. Okay, so what is the solution? Right, so whenever we are dividing any of the number with 2, right, so then if the remainder is 0, then we call that as a even number, right? So if you have right, so 10, right, if you consider 10, what we have in 10, I mean, so is 10 even number or right, so odd number? If someone asks you, right, you'll just simply looking at that, will tell 10 is a even number. How you are doing that, right? So we generally just simply do this, right? So 10 divided by 2 equals to, right, so the remainder is 0. Okay, so the quotient would be 5, but the remainder that we get when we are dividing 10 with 2 is 0, right? So if you are taking 8, right, so 8 divided by 2, remainder that you get is 0. Okay, so that means 8 is also a prime number, so not a prime number, right? So even number. Okay, if you are taking 7, right, 7 is an even number or odd number? This is an odd number, right? Why? Because, right, 7 divided by 2, you will not get the remainder as 0, so that means this is an odd number. Okay, so now that's it. Okay, so now how can we print so even numbers between 0 to 99? Okay, now let's quickly see that. Okay, so now for this, what I will use is, right, first I'll use while loop, and then we'll use do while loop, and then we'll use for loop also, and see how can we print all of that. Okay, so if you want to print 1 to 100 numbers, we can just simply do that, right? So we have already printed 1 to 10 numbers, right? So in that condition, instead of I right, less than or equals to 10, right, you have to give I less than or equals to 100. So then you'll be able to print 1 to 100 numbers. Okay, so first problem is done. Okay, second problem, right? So now we are checking the second problem. Now let's quickly check this. Okay, first what we have to do, right? So while, okay, but before while, what we have to do, right? So declare the looping variable. Okay, integer I equals to what, where, from where we want to start? We want to start with 0. Okay, so I equals to 0. Okay, so first we have started, we have declared that looping variable, and now what we have to do, right? So we want to check till when, right? So till 99. Okay, so for that reason, right, so what I'll do, I less than or equals to 99. How many times we want to run this loop? We want to run this loop for 99 times. Every number, right? So every number, what we want to do, right, we want to check that number, right? We want to divide that number by 2, and if that remainder is 0, then we want to print that particular so if the remainder is 0, then we want to print that number. Okay, so 1, right? So if 1 is, I mean, 1 divided by 2, remainder is 0, we'll print that, right? So here it is not 0, right? So we'll not print it. Okay, so then it will go to 2, right? So 2 divided by 2, right? So is it 0? Yes, right? So it's 0, remainder is 0. Now we will print 2. Okay, so let me just simply, go to some white, background or black background, and let's do this there. Okay, so notepad, let me open this. Okay, right. So what we will do, what we are doing here, right? So first we are, taking 1, right? So, right. So first we want to check 1 divided by 2. Okay, remainder 0. No. Okay, so we are not printing this number. Okay, so we are not printing this number. And then we want to check for 2, right? Is 2 divided by 2. What is the remainder? Right, remainder is 0. Okay, so now we want to print this. Okay, and then we want to check for 3, right? So 3 divided by 2, right? So is the remainder 0? No. Okay, so we are not doing anything, right? And after that 4, right? So 4 divided by 2, what is the remainder? Remainder is 0. Okay, so and then we want to print 4. Okay, so and then comes to 5. 5 divided by 2, right? So it's not 0. Okay, so we don't want to print this up, right? So this way, right? So what we want to do, we want to check for each and every number till 99. Okay, so then only we will get, right, all the even numbers up to 99, like 2 comma 4 comma, right, 6 comma 8 comma 10 comma and all of that, right, 12 comma and all of that, right? So that means we want to check, right, for each and every number till 99. Okay, so for that, what can we do, right? So we have to run that loop 99 times. Okay, the same logic, right? So whatever number we are taking, right, so whether that number is divisible by 2 or not, right? So that we have to check for each and every number till 99. That means what, right? We have to run that loop for how many times? 99 times. Okay, so that means, right, so what is that we have to do, right? So first let's declare that looping variable integer I equals to 0, right? Since we want to print it with start with 0, right? So I have given 0, right? So and then what, right? So while keyword, right? So what is the logic that we have to check here? Okay, what is the condition that not, I mean, what is the condition that we have to give here, right? So what is that condition, right? So how many times we want to run this loop, right? That is what the condition we have to give, right? So we want to run this loop for 99 times, right? So for that, what I'll do, I less than or equals to 99. Okay, so then what will happen, it will start from 0 and it will run till that 99th number. Okay, so now what we can do within this while loop, right? So we can run some block of code. What is that block of code? We want to check, right, whether this I is divisible by 2 or not, right? How can we do that, right? So just simply write this up, right? So if, right, so if, right, so if we want to check, so the remainder of any two numbers, right? So while if we want to check, right, whether right, a particular number is divisible by any other number, right? What do we need to do, right? We need to use math.mod, right? You guys remember this, right? Do you guys remember this math.mod? Guys, please speak out. Okay, so math.mod, what we have to do, we have to divide this I with 2. Okay, so then what will happen, right? So whatever remainder that we get, right, so that's what I mean, like, so when we do this, right, so we'll get a remainder. Okay, so what do we want to check here? So if math.mod double equals to 0, okay, so that means what, right? So we are checking the remainder is equals to 0 or not, right? So with whatever number that is entering here, we are checking whether that number is divisible by 2 or not, right? If the remainder is 2, then what we want to print, right? We just want to print that number, that's it. Okay, system.debug I. Okay, so now what we are doing, we are printing I, that's it. Okay, this is the logic, nothing much. Okay, now just simply quickly check this, what will happen here, right? So first, right, so it started with so 0, right? So first the 0 comes here, right? So is 0 less than 99? Yes, 0 less than 99. Okay, so 0 is less than 99. Okay, so 0 is less than 99. So now what happened, right? So we are what we are doing here, right? So we are so checking, right? So is 0 divisible by 2? Okay, so 0 by 2, what will happen, right? So you'll get 0 as an answer output, right? So that means this condition is satisfying. Okay, this if condition is satisfying. Now right, so whatever the so that we have here, right, so this block of code will be executed, right? So that what we are doing, we are just simply printing that I, right? So now what happened, right? So 0 got printed, and after that what happens, right? So now it will go for next thing, right? So which is 1. Okay, and what we have to do, right, we have to increment this as well, right? So otherwise what will happen, right? So that 0 will remain same for all the iterations. Okay, so now what we have to do, right? So we have to give that increment and decrement as well. Now what we are doing, we are making that I to 1. Okay, so we are incrementing that I to 1, right? Now we have the value that so we are having in I is 1, right? So now what happened, right? So now again we are coming back here, right? So now again we are coming back here and we are checking, right? So is 1 less than or equals to 99? Yes, 1 is less than or equals to 99. Now what we are doing, right? We are coming here and again we are checking some for some other condition using if, right? What is that condition? Is 1 divided by 2 is 0 or not, right? So 1 divided by 2, right? So what is the remainder? It's not 0. Okay, so the remainder is 1. So that means, right, so it will come out of this particular condition block. Okay, whatever we have written, right, it will come out of this condition block, right? So and after that what it will do, it will just simply so what it will do, it will increment it. Okay, so and then what will happen, that this I will become 2, right? So is 2 less than or equals to right, so 99? Yes, 2 less than or equals to 99. Okay, is 2 divided by 2 is equals to 0? Yes, it is equals to 0. Now what we are doing, we are printing that I, right? So which is 2, right? So now 2 also will be printed. Okay, and then what will happen, the 2 will become 3, right? So now it will come again here, right? So is 3 less than or equals to 99? Yes, that's right, right? So now it will come here, right? So now it will check, right? So is 3 divisible by 2 or not, right? So now this fails, right? So now it will come out, and while coming out of this particular if block, right, what we have done, we have written our increment thing as well, right? So now that so I will become 4, right? 3 will become 4, right? So now is 4 less than 99? Yes, 4 is less than 99. Now what will happen, right? So is 4 divisible by 2? It will come inside, right? So it will check, right? Is 4 divisible by 2? Yes, right, it is divisible by 2. Now just print that 4. Okay, so then 4 will be printed. Now what will happen, right? So it will come out of this particular if block, and then it will just check, right? So it will increment that 4 also to 5, right? So then, right, it will come here, right? It will check 5 is not less than 0, right? It will not print, and it will go for 6, right? So and then 8, right? So the same way it will go for all the numbers till 98. Okay, so that way, right, you will have all the all the numbers printed. Okay, all the even numbers printed. Okay, so now let's quickly go back to our developer console and then write this particular program. Okay, so and see what will happen. Is that logic clear, guys? Right, so now the logic that we have just discussed, is it clear or is it confusing? Guys, please speak out. Is that logic clear? Okay, so let's do that declaration, initialization or declaration integer. Okay, so what is the looping variable? I. Okay, so why? Because using this only we are deciding how many times we want our loop to run. Okay, so integer I equals to 0 and then 5 for not for. Okay, so let's use while. Okay, while what? While I less than or equals to 99. So as long as this condition is satisfying, just please execute whatever I'm writing here. Right, so what in this, what we are writing, right? So first we are checking if that I, right, divided by 2 is 0 or not. So for that, what we have to do, math dot, right? So math dot mod of, right? So I comma 2, right, is equals to 0 or not, right? So double equals to 0. We are checking this. Okay, double equals to 0 means, right, so it will check whether both of them are equal or not, right? So that's what the double equals to operator does. Okay, now here what we have to do, we have to print it out, right? So system dot debug print I. Okay, the system.debug I, that means that number will be printed. And after that, what we want to do, once this block of code is executed, right, so then we want to increment it. Okay, increment that I, right? So now what we can do, I equals to I plus 1, or maybe you can just simply keep it like I plus plus, right? So now this block of code will print all of those numbers, right? So first we have 0, right? So 0 less than 99, yes, right? So now we are so dividing 0 with 2 and checking for that remainder, right? So that remainder, right, so will come as 0 as the output, right? So now what we, I mean, like, so since this condition also met, right, so it will go inside this particular right, if block, and whatever we have written within this if block, it will print, right, which will be that means, right, so 0 will be printed. And then so what happens, right? So it is coming out of this if, and we are incrementing that 0 to 1, right? So now it will come here, right? Is 1 less than or equals to 99? Yes, right? What is 1 divided by 2? Remainder, right? So it's not 0, right? So for that reason, this if block won't get executed, right? It will come here again, right? So and it will increment that 1 to 2, right? So now we'll go and check here, is 2 less than 99? Yes, 2 less than 99, right? So now right, so it will come again here and it will check this condition, right? So is 2 divided by 2 0. Yes, 2 divided by 2 is 0. So then this block of code will be executed, right? So then that means 2 will be printed. Then again, right, we are coming out and we are incrementing the 2 to 3, right? So that again, what will happen? 3 less than 99. Yes, right? So now 3 divided by 2, no, it will not execute. But again, it will come out of this if block and it will just simply increment it to 4, right? 4 less than 99, right? So that way it will keep on, right, rotating, right, keep on iterating until this I becomes 99. Okay, until this I becomes 100. Okay, so until this I becomes 100, this loop will keep on right, so run. So if the I becomes 100, then what will happen, right? So this condition fails and then it will come out of this loop. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So now let's execute this and see what will happen. See, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, right? So that way, so it has printed. So all the way down to 98, right? So that 98 is also somewhere in the bottom, but this is not coming up, but you can clearly see that. Okay, so that's what this particular thing is all about.
Integer.
Okay.
I equal to
I equals to
0.
0. Okay.
Do
okay.
system.debug I.
System.debug. Okay.
I.
Okay.
I plus plus.
Okay. And then
while condition.
okay.
I less than or equal to 99.
Okay. And then semicolon. So what it will do, tell me? This will print all the 99 numbers here, but we want only even numbers. What should we do in that case? In this do block. What we have to do? We have to check for one more condition, which is
if.
Right. So whether this number is divisible by 2 or not. Tell me what would be the output here in that case. So not the output, what we have to write in that case. If
math.mode I, 2.
double equals to 0, yes. Then we have to print this up. Okay. So where should we keep this I plus plus? Should we keep this I plus plus within this if block or outside of that if block? I plus plus, should we write it within this if block or within this if block or outside of the if block?
Outside.
Why?
It's conditional.
Yes. If we write this I plus plus within this if block, then what will happen, right? So if this condition is not satisfying, then this increment won't happen. Okay. So it will just simply stuck at that same number. Okay. So first what will happen, right? So it will go, first it will check for 0. So for 0, it will work fine, right? So that 0 will become 1, right? If I'm writing this within this, right? So what will happen? That 0 will become 1, right? So that is also good, right? So now what will happen, right? So now it will check, right, whether 1 is less than or equals to 99 or not, right? So now we know 1 is less than or equals to 99, right? So then again, it will come here and it will try to, right, check for this condition, right? So does this condition, satisfies, right? So no, it will not satisfy. Why? Because 1 divided by 2 is not equals to 0. So then this will fail, right? Since this fails, what happens, right? It will come out of this if block, and again, it will again check for that particular condition, right? We are not doing nothing here. So then what do we have in that I? We have 1 only, right? So that 1 will remain same for the whole execution, and it will just simply stay in that same loop, right? So, and that, so that I won't be incremented. Why? Because this condition is not satisfying, right? And it will stuck there forever. Okay. So then what will happen, right? So it will go to the infinite mode, right? So we also call that as infinite loop. Infinite loop means what, right? So loop that never ends due to faulty code that we are writing here. right? So that kind of loop we call it as, right? So infinite loop. Okay. So if that infinite loop is happening, that means, right, so that will crash your system. Okay. So now let's quickly check this. Okay. So let's quickly check this, what we have done, right? So we've done something wrong here. Okay. So what is that we have done, right? So now, right, so first we have 0 here, right? So, and after that, right, we are checking is 0, right, less than or equals to 2 or not, I mean, is divided by 2 or not, right? So since that is satisfying, right, we are printing that 0, and then, right, so we are incrementing that 0 to 1, right? That 1 is all the, I mean, like, so that I is becoming as 1, right? 1 is less than 99, right? So now it is coming again here, right? It is checking for that 1 divided by 2, and this condition is failing, right? Since this condition is failing, that is not even entering into this block, right? So since that is not entering into the block, right, so that I will be 1 forever. Okay. So now what will happen, right? So again, it will come here and it will check for that condition, right? So 1 less than or equals to 99, yes, that is true, right? Again, it will come here, it will check, right, 1 divided by 2, right? So this condition will fail. Again, it will come back here, again it will check, right? 1 less than or equals to 99, yes, 1 less than or equals to 99, right? Again, it will come here, right? It will check, this condition fails, right? So this way, what will happen, right, that 1 will remain same forever, and this loop, right, so we'll get stuck here and it will continuously loop, so looping for infinite number of times. After 0, right, it will not execute, it will not do anything, right? So this loop will execute forever, and it will fail. Okay. So now let's just simply try doing that and see what will happen, right? So I'm trying to execute. Now let's see what will happen. See, it is executing. It'll at least, so try it for 10 seconds. If that execution is not completing, right, so then it will show that, timed out or something like that. Okay. So just check it out. See, nothing is happening. Okay. It's simply sending that request. See what happened, right? Apex CPU limit exceeded. So that means system is about to crash. That is what it is saying. Okay. So now this is an error. Okay. Is that clear, guys? CPU is not able to handle this. Why? Because this is running in infinite mode. Okay. So now let's, right, try to print the even numbers between 1 to 10, right? So sorry, 1 to 9, 0 to 9. Chip
for integer,
for, okay, integer.
integer, bracket integer,
Mm-hmm.
I equals to
Mm-hmm.
0 or not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Semicolon.
Yeah, semicolon. Yes, I have already given that semicolon. Tell me then.
I less than equals to
Mm-hmm.
99.
Okay. After that,
after that I plus plus one.
I plus plus. Yes, good. Right. Okay. And
Bracket.
within this, yeah. So what we have to do? If
Math dot mod.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I
Mm-hmm.
I comma 2
Mm-hmm.
semicolon.
I comma to semicolon. If low
I
condition kada,
comma
but we have to check condition, right? In generally, what we'll have in if we'll have a condition, no? Math dot mod I comma 2. What we have to check? We have to check whether that reminder, whatever output that is coming up,
equals to
is
0.
equal to 0 or not. Okay.
0.
Okay. And then what's next?
System dot
Mm-hmm.
debug.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Loop ended on
System dot debug loop ended.
I.
We have to print that number, no?
I.
We have to print that number. And after that, what we have to do? Do we have to do anything? Or is it just that, like that? That's it.
I plus plus.
I plus plus is already there here. We already have it here, no? So why do we need to add that I plus plus? That's it. We don't need to do anything, right? So we have done this initialization and declaration here, right? So, and after that, right? So we have written our condition, right? So, and then condition, what does this condition defines, right? You know, how many times this loop should run. That is what this condition is all about.
99 times.
Okay. So 99 times. And after that, what is it, right? So
Increment.
this increment. Okay. So, and after that, what, right? So we are checking for some other conditions and we are just simply printing those numbers, right? So only if this condition satisfies. Okay. So, and then, right. So that is what this particular for loop is all about. Okay. So that's what, so this particular thing is all about. Okay. So you want me to execute it? Okay. Let me just execute this. See 0, 2, 4, 6, right? So we have all the numbers, right? So way back to 99. Okay. So 98, right? So that's what this particular for loop is all about. Okay. So, and then there are two things that we need to know, right? So while running loops is, right? So continue statement and break statement. Okay. So continue statement and break statement. Now let's quickly see what that continue statement and what that, so break statement is all about. Okay. So break statement, right? You know, what does this break statement does? Okay. So whenever you are, right, so running any of the loop, right? So whenever you are there in a loop, okay. So if you want that loop, right, to break, right, so if you want to come out of that loop, right? So, I mean, like, so abruptly, right? So due to some particular, problem or whatever it could be, right? So then we use break. Okay. So maybe let me explain it in some other way, right? So generally we have the condition and everything, right? So we have, right, so if you look at for loop and all of it, right? So we have, right, so this initialization, right? So, and after that condition, right? And after that, what is that, right? So right, so this increment and decrement, everything we have, right? So we are running something here. Okay. So but at some point in time, right, if something matches here, right, so within your block of code, right, so you want to come out of that whole loop. You don't want that loop to run for other iterations. Say for example, within this condition you have decided to run this loop for so 99 times or something like this, or 100 times or something like that. Okay. So 99 or 100 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or something like that. Okay. So while running this loop at some point in time, right, so maybe at the 10th iteration or something like that, right, so some condition has met. Okay. Due to something. Okay. So now what you have decided is, right, you don't want to run this loop for other iterations. Okay. So this is a 10th iteration or something like that, right? After 10th iteration, you don't want to run it for all the other 99 iterations. Okay. So then what can we do, right? So we can use this break statement, right? So within this, right, whenever you are using break statement, whenever this break, right, so is executed within a loop, then what will happen is that, so that particular, I mean, like, so that loop will stop executing and it will come out of that particular whole execution, and whatever code that you have written after that, it will start executing that, right? So it will come out of that loop, right? So whenever a break statement is executed within a loop, right, so at whichever iteration that has been executed, right, so it will stop, right, executing for all other iterations. Okay. It will execute only till that particular iteration. If, right, so if we are seeing that break statement at any point in time while executing that loop, what will happen, right? So we'll directly come out of that particular loop, right? So without, right, iterating, so other iterations. Okay. That's what this break is all about. Okay. Now let's quickly see the definition of it, right? So break statement, right, is a loop control statement that is used to terminate the loop. Okay. We'll just simply terminate it. Okay. Whatever, right, iterations are left, it will not consider it. It will just simply terminate it. Okay. That's what the break statement is all about. Okay. We'll see how, right. So how can we use the break statement within our, so loops? So that will give you some kind of clarity. Okay. And after that, there is some, so there is one more, right, so loop control statement that we use, which is also called as continue. Okay. So why do we use continue? Okay. So if you are using continue, okay, if you are using continue within your loop, what will happen is that, right, say for example, you have 10 iterations. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, you are running a loop for 10 times, say for example. Okay, so while running it, right, first loop, first iteration, right, so it is since the condition is satisfying, right, so right, so there is no problem, so in executing the loop, right, so now we have executed it for the first iteration, second iteration, third iteration, and fourth iteration, and within the fifth iteration, right, there is something that happened, right, there is something that happened, and you don't want that iteration to run, and you want to go to the sixth iteration. Okay, so you just want to skip that iteration. Okay, and you want to go to the next iteration, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, you want to skip it, right? So whenever you want to skip something, right, so while looping, right, so whenever you want to skip any kind of any iteration, okay, whenever you want to skip any iteration, right, in the overall right, overall iterations, then we use continue statement, right? If you are using continue anywhere, then what will happen, right? So wherever, right, in whichever loop, right, in whichever iteration it has seen that continue statement, right, so in whichever statement that continue statement is executed, what will happen is that, so it will come out of that iteration and it will go to the next iteration. Okay, next iteration, and it will continue iterating the next ones. Okay, so that's what continue statement is all about. Okay, so that's what the continue statement is all about. So now let's look at the definition. Okay, so continue statement is used to skip the current iteration of the loop. Okay, current iteration of the loop, right? So that is what we are doing, right? So in whichever iteration that particular continue statement is executed, so it will exit that from that current iteration, and it will passes the control to the next iteration, right? It will go to the next iteration, and from there on, it will continue executing the other iterations. That is what it is. If you are using break, so it will come out of the whole loop. Okay. If you are using continue, it will only come out of that individual iteration. Okay. So is that okay? Good. Right. So that is what this break and continue statement is all about. Okay. So now let's quickly see how can we use this break and continue statement into any of our loops and see what will happen. Okay. So, right. So now, right. So let's look at the same example. Right. So now instead of, I mean, like, so this is something that we can, right. So in the same, so example, let's try to use continue and break statement and see what will happen. Okay. So what I've told you, right, if you are using break statement, it will end the loop altogether. Okay, it will end the loop altogether, and it will go to the next. It'll come out of the loop, and whatever you are right, whatever that is there after that loop, right, it will start executing it. Okay, so first what you'll do is, right, so in order to see that, right, first let's add some few lines of code, right, before and after that loop, and see what will happen. Right, so system dot debug, right, system.debug loop started. Okay, loop started, and then, right, so after the loop ended, right, so system.debug, right, so loop ended. Okay, right. So now what is the requirement in this case, right? So we want to print what? Only the even numbers. Okay, we want to print only the even numbers. Okay, so for that case, what we can do is, right, so right, if math.mod I comma 2 double equals to 0, then what we are doing, we are printing this particular so number, right? So otherwise we are not printing it. Okay, so this is what it is, right? So now we can do it in a different way as well, right? So we can do it the other way also. Okay, what is that other way? Can someone tell me? Okay, so if math.mod, right, so I divided by 2 is not equals to 0, right, then what is that? It's not a even number. So in that case, what do we want to do? We want to skip that particular iteration. Okay, so I'm doing it in a reverse way. Okay, so generally what is it, right? So we are checking if that number is divided by 2 or not, right? So divisible by 2 or not. If that number is divisible by 2, then we are printing it as a prime number. Okay, that is what it is, right? We can do it the other way also, which is, right, so so if, right, so that number is not divisible by 2, if that number, right, so is not divisible by 2 or something like that, so then what we want to do is, right, so we want to do nothing. Okay, we want to, what do we want to do, right? So we just simply want to do nothing, if that number is divisible, if this particular condition is not satisfying, right? So, and then what do we want to do, right? So we want to print that number, right? So if what is this, right? So if this I divided by 2 is not equals to 0, right? So what do we want to do, right? So we tell me, guys. So we want to tell me, what do we want to do, right? So we want to not do anything, right? So, and then we just simply go to else, and whatever we have written else, we want to print that out. Okay, so that is what we want to do it. Okay, so we are doing it the other way, right? So instead of doing it like this, so let's do it in the reverse mode. Okay, so if math dot mod I comma 2 not equals to 0, right? So it's not a even number. Okay, we know that. Okay, so it's not an even number, or it's an even number. It's not an even number. Okay, right? So then what can we do else? What can we do? Tell me, guys. What can we do? Right? We want to print, instead of printing even numbers, let's try to print odd numbers. Okay. Tell me, what can we do in this case? Print the odd numbers between 0 to 99. Okay. So what can we do? System dot debug. Tell me. Debug I. Right. So now what will happen? Tell me, guys. So let's execute this and see what will happen. Right. So we are doing nothing here. Okay. So let's just simply check this out.
I think we get even numbers there.
Yes. Here also we'll get even numbers. Why? Can someone tell me why we'll get even numbers? Right, it's a simple logic here. Okay. So we're doing it the other way, right? So we are checking if that number is divisible by 2 or not. If that number is not divisible by 2, then execute this, we are saying, right? Else print this out. That's what we are saying. If that is an even number, right? So what will happen? Right? So this if block won't be executed, and then this else block will be executed. Then what will happen? This even numbers will be printed, right? Right. So if that is not an even number, then what will happen? This if block will be successful. The condition, whatever that we have written here, this condition will be successful for the odd number, and whatever you write here, so that will be executed. Okay. But we haven't written anything. So if we want to print only the even numbers, right? So then we can write it here, right? If we want to print only the odd numbers, then we have to write it here. Okay. So now let's write it like this. Okay. So I, right? So I plus, okay, so is a odd number. Okay, so is a odd number, right? In this case, I plus is an odd number. So how about this one? In this case, I plus is a even number. Okay, now just simply execute this and see what will happen, right? So we are not using break and continue anything here. So we'll use break and continue also, but first let's check this out. Okay, so we are doing it the reverse way, but still, right? So we are printing whether it's an odd number or even number. Let's simply execute this and see what will happen. Right? So loop started. 0 is an even number, 1 is an odd number, 2 is an even number, 3 is an odd number, 4 is an even number, 5 is an odd number, 6 is an even number, 7 is an odd number. Right? So this way we have, so all the numbers way back to 99. Right? So that's how this particular block of code is working. Right? So now what do we want to do? Right? So we want to execute only, so for what? Even numbers, right? So that's what our requirement is. So in that case, what can we do is, right, we can just simply write this if else only, right? Don't even write that else block, just simply write this if, right? So within this if, so what I will do is I'll just simply write continue statement. Okay, so and then see what will happen, right? If I'm writing continue, see what will happen. Okay, system dot debug, right? So I'll just simply give I here, right? So and see what will happen, right? So this will also give us the same output, right? Not the same output, right? It will just simply give us the numbers, right? From 0 to 99 and see what 98. So let's see what will happen. So can you guys see this? 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 14, 16, and all of that, right? So wait till so 98, we got all of those numbers. But what is this logic that we have written here, right? Can you guys see this, right? So what we are doing, right? So first we are checking for the, so first we have done this initialization. And after that, we are checking if that I is less than or equals to 99 or not, right? So this 0 is less than or equals to 99. And after that, what we are doing, we are checking if that 0 is what? If the 0 is, right, divisible by 2 or not, right? So since that 0 is not divisible by 2, right? So I mean, like, it is divisible by 2. Here we are using not equals to. Not equals to means what will happen? Can someone tell me what's happening here? Right? 0 divided by 2. What's happening here? 0 divided by 2 is not equals to 0 or equals to 0. Tell me, guys. 0 divided by 2 is not equals to 0 or 0 equal to 0. Equals to 0, right? Is that right or wrong? Right? What is the remainder of 0 divided by 2? Guys, please speak out, man. Guys, please speak out. What is the remainder when we divide 0 with 2?
0.
0, right?
Yeah.
So then what will
Zero,
happen?
answer is zero.
Yeah, answer is 0, right? So then what will happen? This condition is not satisfying, right? So whatever we have written in this condition will not be executed, right? After that, what we have written, right? So since this condition failed, right, it will just simply didn't executed that, and just simply it came out here and it just simply executed whatever we have written here, right? Now what will happen? So it is just simply printing I, right? What is that we have it in I? 0 is the value that we have it in I. It just printed the 0. Now what will happen, right? So it will go for the next one, right? So which is 1. Okay, it will go for the next one, which is 1, right? So now in that case, what will happen, right? So the I became 1, right? So is I, right? So is 1 divided by 2, right? Is that equals to 0 or not equals to 0? That is not equals to 0, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now what's happening, right? So this condition is satisfying. Okay. So we have written it the other way. This condition is satisfying. Since that condition is satisfying, what will happen, right? It will enter this if block and it will execute whatever we have written here. What we have written here, right? So we have just simply written continue, right? You can write whatever block of code we want to write, but here we have just simply written continue. Whenever that continue statement comes into picture, or whenever that continue keyword comes into picture, what it will do? It will just simply exit that
Keep it.
iteration. Okay, now what happened, right? So it exited that iteration. Since that is it, since it has exited, right, even though there is something that we have written after this if block, right, it is not considering executing it. So for that reason, what happened, right, it has printed the 0, but it haven't printed anything after this continue statement has executed, right? And it just skipped it and it went to next iteration. In next iteration, what we are doing, we are incrementing the I, right? So now what happened into I? So we got 2, right? So now what happened, right? So is 2 divided by 2 not equals to 0? No, right? So this condition is not satisfying. So for that reason, what will happen, right? It will skip this if block, right? Since that if block is skipped, there is no continue statement that got executed. So for that reason, right, whatever we have written here, so this will be executed, which is system dot of debug of I, right? So which is of 2, right? So 2 will be printed. And then what will happen again? This 2 will become 3. And what happens here, right? So now this 3 comma, right? So I'm like, so the 3 divided by 2, right? What is the remainder? Remainder is not equals to 0, right? So that means this is true, right? Since this became true, what happened, right? It just entered it and entered this if block, and now it executed the continue. Since the continue got executed, what it will do, what continue statement will do? Continue statement will skip that iteration. Okay. So since we are skipping that iteration, whatever that is there after the, this particular line of code, whatever that is there after this line of code, right? So guys, please mute yourself. Okay, so right. So after this, what happened, right? Whatever the line of whatever so the line of code that we have, right? So what happened, right? So this didn't execute it, right? So it just simply right, exited that particular iteration, and that now I became 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 0, right? So which is what happening here, right? So now this particular block is again, right, failing. So for that reason, right, it is executing this, right? So now 4 will be printed, then 4 will become 5, right? So again 5, right? So in this case, this condition is satisfying, right? So now it will come inside and we have continue statement, right? So since we have continue statement, it will exit that iteration and it will come out of it, and then what will happen, right? So then I will become right, 6, right? So again, right, so this fails, this block fails, and then this code runs, and then 6 will be printed like that, right? So it is printing all the 98 numbers, right? So that is what the importance of continue, right? So what continue will do? Continue will only skip that current iteration. Okay. So till wherever it executed, right, and it will execute till there, and whenever that continue statement so came into picture, it will skip only that iteration and it will go to the next iteration. But if we are using break here, right, so what will happen is that it will come out of the loop altogether. Okay, it will come out of the loop altogether. System dot
After continue.
after continue, even if you put that, right, it will not execute. Why? Because, right, since this continue statement has executed, what will happen? It will exit then and there itself, right? So wherever that continue statement got executed, it will just simply exit from there, right? So whatever lines of code that you have after this continue statement, it will not execute even a single line of code, and it will go to the next iteration. Even if you put system.debug after this, it will not work. If you are putting system.debug before this, then what will happen? It will print the other numbers also. Okay. Why? Because here it is printing 0, 2, 4, 6 and all of that. But here what will happen? It will enter this if block, right, for 3, for 1, 3, 5 and everything, right? It will enter this if block. And what is the first line that we are having within this block, right? If we are writing system.debug, the first line is printing that number. What it will do? It will print 1, right? And after that, it will come out of that loop, right? So the same thing goes for 3 also. What it will do, right? It will enter the loop, right? So if our first line is printing that number, it will print 3 also. Okay. So then it will exit out of that loop. Then what will happen, right? So we'll have all the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and everything. So that is not our requirement, right? So for that reason, what we have done, right? So we have kept the continue statement at the first. Okay. So after continue, whatever you are writing, it will not execute. It will not be executed. Before continue, whatever we are writing, so till that extent, it will execute. Okay. So that's what continue is all about. Okay. So now let me use break statement and see what will happen, right? If we are using break, what I've told you, it will come out of the whole loop. Okay. Whenever a break is executed, right, so what it'll do, it will come out of the whole loop. So now, so I want someone to tell me the execution of this loop and tell me the output, what kind of output that we'll get. Okay. So what will be the first, first line of code that will be executed? This loop started will be executed, right? So what will be the output? Loop started will be the output.
Loop started.
Okay. And after that, what will happen?
Integer I is equal to,
we have 0.
0.
We have 0 in it, and
0 less than 99.
Okay.
And next it is increment or decrement.
Okay, this is something we have written. Okay, right? Okay, 0 less than 99. Okay, for that reason, what will happen? It will come inside, and then what will happen?
Math mode divided by 2 అవుతుందా లేదా అయితే 0 వస్తుందా లేదా అని చూడాలి కానీ ఇక్కడ మనం నాట్ ఈక్వల్ టు 0 ఇచ్చాము.
Okay, right. So then what will happen?
So అది break execute అనేది అవ్వదు.
Okay, right. So it will not execute. Okay, so then what will happen?
దానివల్ల ఏమవుతుందంటే అది ఇది రన్ అవుతుంది కంటిన్యూ ఇచ్చినప్పుడు ఇది రన్ అవుతుంది.
ఇది ఇప్పుడు రన్ అవుతుంది అంటే ఇప్పుడు బయటకు వచ్చింది, ఇది రన్ అవ్వలేదు. ఓకే, సో ఇట్ కేమ్ అవుట్ ఆఫ్ దిస్ పర్టికులర్ if block. Okay, not came out of it, didn't even enter the if block, right? So now what will happen? It will print
direct
I value which is 0. And after that what happened?
మళ్ళీ
I became
మళ్ళీ పైకి అవుతుంది I plus కి నెక్స్ట్ 1
I1. Okay, now what happened?
Same మళ్ళీ నాట్ ఈక్వల్ టు 0 1 divided by 0 అవుతుంది.
So is this condition satisfying or not satisfying?
Not satisfying.
Once please check that once again. Is it satisfying or not satisfying?
First value 0 divided by 0 వస్తుంది. Next 1 divided by 0.
1 divided by 2. What is it? 1 divided by 2.
1 divided by 2 అనేది 0.5 something.
1 divided by, that means it's not 0, right?
Yeah, not 0.
Not 0 means is this condition satisfying or not satisfying?
Not equal, satisfying.
Satisfying. So now what will happen? It will enter into this
next level
block. Yeah, it will enter into this block, right? So what do we have in this block? Break means what will happen? It will come out of the whole loop. It will not even go to the next iteration. It will come out of the whole loop. So since it is coming out of the whole loop, what do we have here? Since that loop is ended, what do we have here? System.debug loop ended. Okay, so now what happened? Right, the whole loop got ended. Only 0 got printed here. Okay. Yes, so that's how this break statement will work. Okay, so that's how this break statement will work. So let me just simply execute this and see what will happen. Okay, so now let's execute this and see what will happen. Can you guys see this? Loop started. First one got executed, right? So since we didn't, so entered this if block, right? So this break statement didn't execute it. So for that reason, we got saved and somehow, so the system.debug got printed, right? This 0 got printed. Now that 0 became 1, right? So then what happened, right? So this condition satisfied, right? So 1 divided by 2 is not equal to 0, right? So that means this, so remainder is not equal to 0. So that means this condition satisfied. Since this condition satisfied, what happened? This break statement got executed. Since this break statement got executed, what happened? We just simply came out of the whole loop, right? So, and then, right, so whatever that we have written after the loop, that got executed, which is loop ended. Okay, so is it clear, guys? So like how this break statement works and everything. Okay, so now so let's go back to our hands-on exercises and see, so 1 or 2. Okay, so let's check these two, right? So what is it, right? Let's check these 2 problems, right? So exercise problems, and after that, right? So you guys, I want you guys to try out all the other problems, right? So for this particular weekend. Okay, so now what is the next problem? Find the factorial of a given number. So does anyone know what factorial is? Does anyone know what factorial is? Okay, so you don't need to worry much about it, guys, right? So the reason why we are giving all of these problems is for you to understand the building blocks of code. Okay, so we'll not write these factorials and everything in our right, real-time code, but we should be understanding, right, why we are using all of this. Like how to use this building blocks of programming, right? So in order to write any bigger programs. Okay, so right, so now let's quickly look at what factorial is. Okay, so if someone is asking for 5 factorial, okay, so then, right, so 5 factorial means, right, so what you have to do is 1 into 2 into 3 into 4 into 5. That is what 5 factorial is, which is 125. Okay, 125 or some other thing. 1 2s are 2, 2 3s are 6, 6 4s are 24, 24 5s are, is it 125? Is it 125?
Yes.
125, right? So factorial of 3. If someone is asking, like, what is the factorial of 3? Right, so this is how we represent it in mathematics, right? So for factorial, okay, 1 into 2 into 3, which is 6, right? Factorial of 4. What is the factorial of 4? 1 into 2 into 3 into 4, which is 24. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So now what do we want to do, right? So we want to find the factorial, right? So whenever a number is given, right? So if someone is given 5, then we have to find factorial of 5. If someone is giving 6, then we have to find factorial of 6, right? So now let's quickly see the logic of it. Okay, so now say for example, if the integer, right, let's take it like this, integer a is equals to 5. What is this a, right? We want to find the factorial of this. So we want to find the factorial of 5. Okay, so that is what it is, right? So now we have taken the 5 here. So then what do we have to do, right? If we want to get the factorial, right? So now the logic is very simple. Okay, so what can we do is, right? So let's use while or for loop, right? So I am very much so interested to use for loops most of the times, but if you want to use whichever loop, right, you can use it with that particular loop, or else write all the problems, so with in all the 3 formats: while, do while, and for loop. Okay, so please do that, right? So that is something you guys have to do, but let me do it with okay, let me do it with while loop in that case. Okay, first what we have to do, right? So initialize the looping variable. Okay, integer I equals to 0 or 1. Let's keep integer I equals to 1. Why? Because right, so we want to run that loop 5 times, right? So for that reason, what I've done, right, let me just simply keep integer I equals to 1. Okay, so from 1 to 5 I will write that loop. So now how many times I want to write that particular run that particular loop? So I want to run that particular loop for 5 times. Okay, while I less than or equals to a. Okay, what is that a that we have, right? So if we are giving 5, then this loop will run for 5 times. If we are giving 6, then this loop will run for 6 times. If we are giving 10 here, then this loop will run for 10 times. Okay, so for that reason, what I have done, right, I have given the condition as I less than or equals to a. Okay, so then what we can do, right? So now let me take one thing, right? So what is that we want to get, right? In output, we want to get an output of the factorial of this particular number, right? For that reason, what I'll do is I'll declare one more variable, right? So integer variable, and I will call that as factorial. Okay. So generally what, factorial output or whatever it be, whatever name you want to write, have it, you can just simply give that name. Okay. So here, what can we do, right? So as I told you earlier, for every value, so I mean, like for every, so variable, while declaring it, it is always a best practice to initialize some value. So in our case, what can we do, right? Should we keep 0 or 1? Okay. So let's keep it 1. I'll tell you why we are keeping it 1, so that you'll get, you will, so get some idea, right? So once I write the code that, so that is needed here, right? So now what can I do is, it's just a simple thing, right? So as long as this condition is satisfying, right? So what I want to do is, I want to just simply make this factorial, right? So equals to, factorial equals to, right? 1 second. Okay. So factorial equals to factorial into I. Okay. And then I plus plus. What we are doing here, can someone tell me what we are doing here? Right. So first we have taken the 5, and that means we want to get the factorial of 5. Okay. So, and then what we have done, guys, integer I equals to 1. Okay. Integer I equals to 1. We have initialized the, right. So what is it? We have initialized the, okay. But before that, okay, sorry. So integer A equals to 5. This, that means we want 5 factorial. Okay. Whatever value that we are getting, right? So whatever value that we want to, so whatever output that we want to have, right? For that, what I've done, right? I have created one more variable named factorial. Okay. So in that factorial, I've just simply kept 1 as an, so 1 as a, so value. Okay. So initial value. And after that, what I've done, right? So I have, declared and initialized the looping variable, which is integer I equals to 1. So as long as that, I is less than or equals to 5, what I want to run, I want to run this particular code, right? What I'm doing, I'm just simply multiplying this factorial with I. Okay. So when I equals to 1, then what will happen? This factorial will become 1 into 1. Okay. So then what is the value that you are having in factorial? What is the value that we are having in factorial? Okay. What is the value that we are having in factorial? Right. So now we are having the value as 1. Okay. Why? Because the first thing is 1 into 1, right? So the value that we have in factorial is 1, and the I is also 1. So that means, right? So we are having value as 1 in the factorial. And after that, what we have done, we have made this I to I plus plus. So that means we have incremented this, right? So now what will happen, right? So this, I has become 2, right? So now again, is 2 less than or equal to 5? Yes, 2 is less than or equal to 5. Now what we are doing, we are again making factorial equals to factorial into I. So which is 1, right? So that means now in factorial, what we are having, right? So 2 into 1, right? So what is the value that we are currently having in factorial? 1, right? So now what we are doing, we're just simply multiplying this factorial, right? So this factorial, whatever value that we have, into what? So this I, which is 2, right? So 2 into 1 or 1 into 2, whatever you want to call it. Now, what is the value that we are having in factorial? 2, right? So the value that we got now is 2, right? So then what we have done, right? So we are making that I to I plus plus. So that means now the value that we are having in I is 3. Okay. So now is 3 less than 5? Yes, 3 is less than 5, right? So since 3 is less than 5, what we are doing again, we are executing this, right? So what we are doing, right? So we are doing factorial equal to factorial into I, right? That means what is the value that we are having in factorial? 2, right? So 2 into, right? So what is that we want to do? I, right? So which is 3. So what is the output now? So we are getting 6 into factorial, right? So now we are making I to 4. Okay. I plus plus is making 4, right? So now is 4 less than 5? Yes, 4 is less than or equals to 5. So now what will happen, right? So now again, we are multiplying that factorial into I, which is 4. Okay. So now 6 into 4, right? So what will be the output? 6 into 4, 24. Okay. So now what happens, right? So now that I becomes, after that I becomes 5. Okay. I equals I plus plus means, right? So I plus 1 means, right? So that 4 will become 5, right? So is 5 less than or equals to 5? Yes. Since we have this less than or equals to, right? So that means this condition is still satisfying. So now we'll just come inside, right? So now what will happen, right? So factorial equals to factorial into I. So now then what will happen, right? So this 24 into what is the value that we are having in I, right? 5, right? So 24 into 5 equals to 125. So now what when we do, right? We can just simply print that out after this particular loop, system.debug, right? So factorial. So now what is the value that we are having in factorial, right? So this particular 25 we are having, sorry, 125 is the value that we are having in factorial. Is it clear? Let me write it with for loop. Okay. So, but before that, right? So what can we do, right? So integer, right? So a equals to 5, a or n, whatever you want to take it, you can take it. And after that, what do you want to take? Integer factorial or f, whatever you want to take it, right? You can just simply take it like this. Okay. So factorial equals to 1. Why I have given 1? Why? Because we are multiplying that factorial with the same factorial within that loop. If I'm making that as 0, then what will happen? Anything into 0 will become 0, right? So that means if we, even if we run that loop for 10 times or 20 times, right? So that will not make any sense. Why? Because the final value that we'll have in that we'll get out of that, so factorial will be 0. So for that reason, I've initialized it with 1. Okay. So, and after that, what do we need to do, right? For, tell me, integer looping variable, integer I equals to 0. Okay. So I less than or equals to a. Okay. So if you are giving 5, then this loop will run for 5 times. If you are giving 6, then this loop will run for 6 times. Right? If you are giving 10, then loop will run for 10 times. And then after that, what? What? Tell me, guys.
I plus plus.
I plus plus. Okay. So, and then what's next? Okay. So factorial, right? So factorial equals to what we are doing? Factorial equals to factorial into what? What we have to do? I. Okay. So I, and then what we are doing? I. No, you don't need to do I plus plus. Okay. Why? Because so this I plus plus is already here. Okay. So now what's next? Right. So system dot debug I. Okay. So now let's execute this and see what will happen. Is this clear, guys? So it's the same thing we have done. Okay. So condition, sorry, not condition, initialization, condition, increment and decrement. We have written all of this, and we are just simply doing this factorial equals to factorial into I, right? So if you are having 5, right? So this will be multiplied 5 times one after the other, right? So, right, if this is 6, this will be multiplied 6 times. If that is 10, it will be executed 10 times, 20 times, right? Whichever number of times you want to execute. So it will be executed those many number of times. Let me execute this. Variable does not exist, I. Why it is saying variable does not exist, I? Okay. Why I am printing this to you? Yes. So we have to print this factorial. Okay. So why it is saying I is integer, I mean like variable I is not in existence is because, right? So that here we have declared the integer I equals to 0. But, right, so we are not able to use that particular integer, particular variable out of that loop, right? So why? Because, right, so when you are declaring any variables within, right, a particular loop or something like that, right, or within a block of code, right, within a loop, then what will happen is that those variables will be available only for that particular block. Okay, so that is something you guys have to keep in mind. Okay, so if I am declaring this integer, right, somewhere outside, then what will happen is that, right, we can access that variable anywhere within our code. But if you are declaring any variable within a particular loop, then that variable will be that variable can be utilized only within that particular loop. Okay, so it cannot be accessed outside of that particular loop. So whereas factorial, what we have done, we have declared that factorial out of that particular loop, but we have used that factorial inside the loop. But, right, so since this is declared outside of this loop, right, so even if you want to access it after this particular line of code, we were able to access it. But here this I, we were not able to access it outside of this loop. Why? Because so we have declared this within this particular loop. Okay, so now let's execute this and see what will happen. All right, we'll get the output as 125. Okay, so why? What happened? Why we got the output as 0? Can someone tell me? Why? Because we have kept the I as 0. Can some? Yeah, so we have to keep the I, we have to make the I equals to 1. Why? Because since we make I equals to 0, what happened? Right? So 1 into 0 became 0 here for the first, within the first execution. So after that, right, since we have 0 in this factorial, right, so even you bring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or something, whatever it is, right? So 0 into any number is 0. For that reason, we got 0 as output, right? So now let me execute this. Right? So I've made I as 1. So now let me execute this and see what will be the output, right? So now the output is 120, right? So it's not 125, guys, it's 120. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So now, right, so since I said, right, so if you are declaring a variable within a loop, right, you cannot use that outside of the loop, I've told you, right? So but now let me tell you, right, so while, right, now let me just simply convert this into while. Okay, if I want to convert this into while, what should I do? I need to declare or initialize the variable first, and after that I have to use while. Okay, and then condition, and then what's next, right? So and then increment or decrement here, and then, right, so whatever you want to print it here, you can print it here, right? So now if we execute this, this will also give us the same output. But if I want to print I here, okay, now I can print it. Why? Can someone tell me? Earlier that is not possible, now this is possible. Now you'll get something. Yes, right. So now this integer I equals to 1 is declared outside of this loop. Okay, this I is something we have declared outside of this loop. That means this variable can be accessed anywhere within your program, right? So not just within your loop, right? So that can be accessed outside of it as well. So now if I try to print I, so now what will be the output? Can someone tell me? Right, if this code is executed, right? So if I am printing I, right, so what will be the output? 5 will be the output, right? Why? Because so at the end of this loop, what is the value that we have in 5? That we have in I. 5 is the value, right? 5 or 6? 6 is the output that you will get. Why? Because, right, so till 5 this has executed well, right? So when I became 6, what happened? This condition failed and we came out of this loop, right? So 6 is not less than or equals to 5. That is the reason we so came out of this loop, right? So that means what is the value that you are having in I? 6 is the value that you are having in I. Okay, by the time we are coming out of this loop, so the value that we are having in I is, right, the last value that we are having in I is 6. So now if I execute this, the output that we'll get is 6. Okay, so not 5, we'll get the 6, right? So now just simply quickly check this and see what will happen. See, 6 is the output. Is it clear, guys? Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so now it's already 9:30. Okay, right. So now, so let me show you this Fibonacci as well. Okay, so what is Fibonacci series? Does anyone know what Fibonacci series is? Okay, I'll show you the Fibonacci series. Okay, so this is the Fibonacci series. 0, 1, 0 plus 1, 1, 1 plus 1, 2, 1 plus 2, 3, 2 plus 3, 5, 3 plus 5, 7, 5 plus 7, 12, 12 plus 7, right, 19. So this is the Fibonacci series. Okay, so the next number, so of a Fibonacci series is the addition of the two preceding numbers. Okay, so that's what we call it as a Fibonacci series, right? So what do we want to get, right? So we want to get, so the first 500 Fibonacci numbers. First 500 means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, so we have printed 10 Fibonacci numbers here. If you want 500, so we have to run the loop for 500 times, right? So with whatever logic that we want to have, right? So is it clear, guys, what the Fibonacci series is?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let me show you this, right? So now Fibonacci series. Fibonacci series. Okay, 0, 1, 0 plus 1, 1, right? First two numbers are 0, 1, right? So and after that, right? So 0 plus 1 is 1, right? So 1 plus 1, right? So 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 1 is 2, right? So and after that, 1 plus 2 is 3, and after that, 2 plus 3 is 5, and after that, 3 plus 5 is 8, right? 5 plus 3, 5 plus 8 is 13, right? That way we got the output, right? So now, how to write a program for this, right? Can someone tell me how can we write a program for this, right? So every number that we are getting here is a sum of preceding two numbers. Okay. So how it started, right? It started with 0, right? So first what we have to do is first we have to take the first two numbers. Okay. So first two numbers into some variable or something like that, and then only we will be able to so add all the numbers. Okay. So first in that case, what we have to do, right? So we should be having three numbers. Okay. So integer. Okay. So first number, or let's call it like this. Okay. Integer, right? So integer now n1, right? So let's call it number 1. Okay. Integer n1 equals to 0. It is starting with 0, right? Okay. And then integer n2 equals to 1. Okay. So, and after that, what? Right. So now whatever integer that we are taking here, right, we can consider like, integer n3 or something like that, or maybe next number, or like, let's call it as next number or n3. Okay. So integer n3 equals to what n3 should become, right? So n3 should become n1 and n2, n1 plus n2, right? So n1 plus n2, right? And after that, what should happen? What should happen? Can someone tell me? Right. So now just simply clearly check this, right? So if this is n1, and okay, let's simply write it like this: 0, 1, right? So 1, right? So 2, right? So 3, 5, let's keep it like this. Okay. So here, right, if this is n1, right? So if this is n2, right? So what happened to n3? N1 plus n2 has become n3. Okay. So what this n4 has become, right? So what this 2 now, right? So this 2 is n2 plus n3, right? So that means, so what this particular so 3 should become, right? So this 3 should become, right? So this 1 plus 2. So if you clearly observe it, right, what's happening, right? If you are using n3 equals to n1 plus n2, right? If you're so using some kind of formula like this, so then what should happen, right? So this n2 should become what? This n3, and this n3 should become, right, the previous number, right? So if you once again, let me clearly let's clearly see this once again, right? So let's try to understand this. Okay. So what we are doing, right, so first, right, so it started with 0 and 1, and now n3 is n1 plus n2. Now what should happen, right? So if you want to print 2, then what should happen, right? Into this n1, right, we should have this 1, and to this n2 we should have this 1. Okay. So then n3 will become n1 plus n2, which is 2, right? So once the 2 is printed, and after that, what should happen? Once the 2 is printed, what should happen, right? So into this, right, n1, right? So you should have this 2, then, right? So into this n2, right, you should have 3 then. Okay. So then what will happen, right? So this 2 plus, right? So this 1 plus 2 will become 3, right? So now the value that you are having in n3 is 3. Okay. So, and after that, right, so what will happen, right? So after that, after 3 is printed, right, now what we have to do, right? We have to bring this 2 into, tell me, we have to bring this 2 into, we have to bring this 2 into n1, right? So, and we have to bring this 3 into n2. So then what will happen? Then 2 plus 3 will become 5, right? So then the value that we'll have in n3 is 5. So, and after that, what we have to do, if we have to print the next number, which is 8, right? What we have to do, we have to bring this 3 into n1 and this 5 into n2. Is that clear, guys? Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, logic is clear, right? If we know the logic, then writing the program is not much difficult, right? So in that case, what can we do, right? We can just simply write, so for loop or whatever it is, right? So what can we do, right? If we want to print only first 10 numbers, then what can we do, right? So integer I equals to, right? So 1, right? So if you want to, run it for 10 times, right? So integer I equals to 1, I less than or equals to, right? So I less than 10, okay? So or less than or equals to 10, right? So whichever way you want to write it, right? You can write it I plus plus. Then what will happen, right? So this loop will be this loop will run for 10 times. So now what can we do in this case, right? So now within this particular thing, what should we write as, right? So first, so what is it, right? So first what we have to do is, right, so we have to make this n3, right? So n3 equals to n2 plus n1, right? So first we have to make this n3 equals to n2 plus n1. And after that, what we have to do, right? We have to make n2 equals to what? N3, sorry. So right, that's the same thing, right? So n1 equals to n2 and n2 equals to n3, right? You can write it, so right, so maybe you can write this up and you can write this down, whichever way you want to write this, you can write it like this. Okay, so what we are doing, we are just simply swapping the numbers. Okay, so we are bringing that whatever value that is there in n1 into and whatever value that is there in n2, right? That value we are bringing it to n1, right? So whatever value that is there in n3, right, sorry, in n2, n3, that we are bringing it to n2. Okay, so that is what we are doing here. So and after that, what will happen, right? So you can just simply print what? So print so before this or maybe after this, you can just simply print system.debug, so n3, right? So then what will happen is that every time, right? So this n1 will become n2, this n2 will become n3, and then we will be printing n3, right? So every time, right? So this loop will run for 10 times, and all of those 10 times, right? So these numbers will be printed, okay, one after the other, right? Is that clear, guys? Or is it little confusing? అర్థమైందా? ఏమైనా కన్ఫ్యూజింగ్ అనిపించింది అది? అర్థమైందా? ఏమైనా కన్ఫ్యూజింగ్ అనిపించిందిరా? ఓకే, ఇంటిజర్ n1 ఈక్వల్స్ టు, రైట్? సో ఫస్ట్ ఎక్కడి నుంచి స్టార్ట్ అవుతున్నాయి మనకి? 1 నుంచి 0 నుంచి స్టార్ట్ అవుతుంది కదా. ఓకే, సో ఇంటిజర్ n1 ఈక్వల్స్ టు 0 పెట్టుకుందాం. ఓకే, రైట్. సో తర్వాత రైట్, అరే ఎంత ఎలాంటి ప్రాబ్లమ్స్ అయితే రావు మనకి. ప్లీజ్ కీప్ దట్ ఇన్ మైండ్, రైట్? సో దీస్ కైండ్ ఆఫ్ ప్రాబ్లమ్స్ విల్ నెవర్ హ్యావ్ ఇన్ అవర్ రైట్, సో రియల్ ప్రోగ్రామింగ్, రైట్? సో వెన్ వీ డూ ఇట్, బట్ రైట్, సో ఇలాంటి కాంప్లెక్స్ ప్రాబ్లమ్స్ చేస్తే మనకి తర్వాత ప్రోగ్రామింగ్ రాసేటప్పుడు ఇంకా ఈజీ అయిపోతుంది అనమాట. ఇలాంటివి అయితే ఉండవు అసలు మనకి, కానీ ఇలాంటి కాంప్లెక్స్ కూడా చేస్తూ ఉండాలి, రైట్? సో n2 ఈక్వల్స్ టు వాట్? 1. ఓకే, సో నౌ దెన్ ఏం చేస్తున్నాము, రైట్? ఫర్ లూప్ రాస్తున్నాం, రైట్? ఫర్ ఇంటిజర్ I equals to 0, not 0, 1, I less than or equals to n, right? So I, not n, sorry, I less than or equals to any Fibonacci. So how many Fibonacci numbers we want to print, right? So say 500. For example, we want to, 500, right? So let's print it, right? So integer, right? So a equals to 500, right? So let's keep it like this, or maybe first let's so keep 5 so 5 Fibonacci numbers, right? So for our simple understanding, okay, I equals to 1, I less than or equals to a, right? So that means we want to run this loop for 5 times. I plus plus, okay, I plus plus, and after that, what is it, right? So let's come down, and what do we want to do first, right? So first we want to print the first 2 numbers, right? So since we want to print the first 2 numbers, what can we do, right? We can just simply write system.debug, right? So print n1 first. Let's print the n1, and then system.debug, right? Print n2 as well. Okay, so first print the 2 numbers. Okay, so and after that, what we are doing, right? So we want to create one more integer, right? So which is integer n3. Okay, so let's not do anything, right? Let's just simply keep 0 into it, right? So let's just simply declare that variable and just simply keep it aside for a time being. Okay, now for now, right, once we enter this particular loop, what should we do? n3 equals to n1 plus n2. So now what do we have in n3? Tell me, guys. So 0 plus 1. What is that we have in n3 now? 1, right? So now let's print that out, right? So now already we have printed 0 and 1. Now we are printing system.debug n3, which is what? Which is 1. Okay, 0 got printed, 1 got printed, and now 1 also got printed. 1 also got printed. Okay, so now what happens after that, right? So now, right, so the preceding number should move to the next right, so next what is it, right? So the previous integer values, right? So that is what we want to do, right? So for that, what can we do? So now let's do this, right? So now n1 equals to n2, right? And n2 equals to n3, right? So now what will happen? if you're doing n1 equals to n2 and n2 equals to n3, right? So what is that we have it in, right, n2, 1, right? So now into n1, we got the value of 1, okay? Now into n1, right? So now into n1, we got the 1 value, right? In n2, which value we are getting now? Into n2, which value we are getting now? 3 we are, 3 or 1, right? Here also n1 plus n2, right? What is the value currently we are having in n3, right? So let's just simply write it down here, okay? So, right, so first 0 got printed, right? And then 1 got printed, right? And after that, here we are doing n3 equals to n1 plus n2, 0 plus 1, how much? It is 1, right? So now we are printing n3. So now 1 also got printed. And after that, what we are doing, right? Into n1, we are bringing n2, right? So what is the n1, right? So, so here is the n1, right? So what is that we are bringing here? N2 we are bringing in. What is the value that we are having in n2? 1 is the value we are having in n2, right? So now n1 has become 1, okay? Now n2 equals to n3, right? So what is that we have in n3, right? So we also have 1 in n3, right? So that is what, right? So happened 0 plus 1, 1, right? So now n2 became n3. So that means now what is the value that we have in n2, right? So now we have the value as 1 in n2, right? So now it will come here, okay? So it will come here and that I will become 2, right? So 2 less than or equals to 5, right? So now again it will come here. So now n3 equals to n1 plus n2, right? So what will be that n1 plus n2? Right, it will be 1 plus 1, right? So now the value in n1 is 1, n2 is 1, right? So 1 plus 1 will become 2, right? So now the 2 has so now we are printing this n3, right? So that means 2 is printed, right? So now what is that value that we have in n2? N3, right? So 2 is the value that we have in n3, right? So now what is the value that we have in n2, right? So in n2 we have 1, right? So we already having 1, 2, 1. So that 1 is entering into this n1. So now what is the value that we are having in n1, right? So now 1 is the value that is going into n1. Why? Because we have so 1 in n1, right? N2, right? So for that reason 1 is entered into this n1, right? So now the current values has become 1, right? So now what we are doing into n2, what we are doing, right? We are adding n3 into n2. What is that value that we are having in n3, right? So 2 is the value that we are having in n3. So now this n2 has become 2, right? So now what are the values that we are having in n1 and n2? 1 and 2, okay? So now what we are doing, right? So see, 1 and 2 are the previous preceding two numbers, okay? Now what we are doing, right? So now we are doing n3 equals to n1 plus n2, right? So 1 plus 2 will become what? 3, okay? So now that 3 we are printing again, system.debug, right? So 3 will be printed. So, and again, right? So this n1 will become n2. That means what will happen, right? So into this n1, we'll have 2, into this n2, right? So we'll be having 3, right? So, and then, right? So again, 2 plus 3 will become 5, okay? So that 5 will be printed, right? Again, this 3 and 5 will go into, right, n1 and n2, right? So then again, right? So we are adding them, right? So then 8 will be the output, right? So then 8 we are printing, right? So, and then this n1 is becoming 5 and this n2 is becoming 8, right? 5 plus 8, right? So 13, okay? So that way it will go on. Is it clear, guys, how this particular logic will work?
Yes,
Can we execute it and see what will be the output? Let's execute this. See, 0, 1, 1, 1 plus 1, 2, 1 plus 2, 3, 2 plus 3, 5, 5 plus 3, 8. So this way, right? So if you are giving some other number here, right? Like, 10 or 20 or something like that. So that way, right? So those many numbers will be printed. Okay. So that is what this particular thing is all about, right? So this is not about coding, guys. Okay. This is not all about coding, right? So if you know the syntax, that means you know coding, right? If you know how to use that syntax, that means you know coding. It is all about thinking about the logic, right? It is all about mathematics. Okay. Is that clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So please, so try to solve these numbers, right? Find the prime numbers between 0 to 100, write a program to print the below pyramid structure, write the program to print the below pyramid structure, and, so calculate the average of numbers between 1 to 100 and all of this, right? So, right. So these will be little difficult, but, so just go through all the class and write down all the notes, and then, so try to figure out the answers by yourself. If you're still not able to find it out, then discuss between yourself, right? Log in into Click, right? So plan for, a call in between, right? So afternoon or morning based on your availability today and tomorrow, and try to complete all of these hands-on exercises. If there is any possibility, I'll try to add few more hands-on exercises as well.